So, Dimitri, we talk about a busy day in politics at pretty much at every level. And maybe the surprise today, given the fact that, we knew the Pablo Rodriguez announcement was going to be made, and that's fine. I don't think we knew the fallout that would happen in Quebec. You had Francois Legault sniping at Paul Saint Pierre Plamondon, calling on him to somehow convince Yves-François Blanchet to bring down the government. What'd you make of all this?
It's like three-dimensional chess, Aaron. You have the official opposition in Ottawa that desperately wants an election because they're doing so well in the polls. You have the NDP that stayed quiet until Yves-François Blanchet came out to say that they will be supporting the government and not triggering an election. You then have the Premier of Quebec come out, as you said, and call on the PQ to tell its little brother, the Bloc Québécois, to actually vote against the sitting Liberal government and Prime Minister Trudeau's government. Now, the big question is why? Why is the Bloc Québécois not defeating the Liberals? Some of the Bloc insiders are telling me that despite this being a great political opportunity, what do I mean by that? The Bloc actually had a great summer. They came out this summer, and as we see in the polls right now, they're roughly anywhere between 32 and 35% in the polls in Quebec. The Liberals and the Conservatives are dead heat tied at 25% each. The Bloc just won a by-election. We talked about that last week. They won a by-election in La Salle et Marverdun. And for all intents and purposes, they should be just as hungry for an election as the Conservatives are. Why are they not? There was a recent Leger poll that said, what are you most worried about? And it asked that question to Quebecers. And the two questions were, are you worried more about 4 more years of Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister or a majority conservative government led by Pierre Poilievre? 34% of Quebecers are worried about a Justin Trudeau government for 4 more years, and 44% of Quebecers are worried about a conservative government led by Pierre Poilievre, which will likely, as per polls are indicating, will be a majority government. So the calculated risk that the Bloc is taking is this won't change. We are still poised to win for the first time in a long time, because remember in 2011, Jack Layton swept Quebec. Since 2015, Justin Trudeau has been winning the majority of the seats in Quebec. So the Bloc is taking a risk. It may be a calculated risk, but the risk that they're taking is that things won't change, and Quebecers will have them as the fallback position. They are now trying, and what I'm hearing from the Liberal side, the government side, is the Bloc and the Liberals over the last few days have been in discussions to strike a deal specifically on a Bloc piece of legislation that's currently in the House of Commons and will not move to the Senate unless the government gives it something called royal recommendation. What's royal recommendation? It's when a private member's bill is also a money bill. It has financial implications. So what I expect to see in the days to come, or in the next week or 10 days, is that the Liberals will announce that they will give a royal recommendation to this bill, which does what? It increases pensions by approximately 10% for seniors between the age of 65 and 74, because what the government has already done is it has increased those pensions by 10% more or less for seniors 75 and over.
I'm hearing you say this, Dimitri, and I think to myself, you're basically describing another supply and confidence deal, except instead of with the NDP, it's with the Bloc.
That's what it's shaping up like. And what we saw over the last 2 years of the supply and confidence deal that existed between the NDP and the Liberals was basically the Bloc was eclipsed. The Bloc Québécois no longer mattered. And the other calculation that the Bloc is making, according to their own strategists who are speaking to me, is we will be once again in the bleachers, irrelevant, if Pierre Poilievre wins a majority government.
Right. But then you wonder, okay, so the Liberals, we're looking at an election one way or another. As early as in the spring, perhaps? No sooner than that, federally?
I would say that your guess of spring is the fairest and most accurate guess we can make as to when the next federal election will be.
Okay.
Why is that? Because in a minority parliament, anything can happen.
Okay, so I bring that up because I think to myself, okay, the Bloc's going to go to the Liberals. Hey, guess what? We now have the balance of power. The NDP don't look like they're going to do anything. How much do you think the Liberal Party has to give up to want to keep the bloc? You mentioned this issue with, the extra 10% for people in that age group. How much more? Is this it? Is this a win for the bloc to be able to say, look what we got from the Liberals, we won't bring them down, and then what?
Well, they will portray it as a win, and then the question becomes, what next? And will there be something else that the Liberals can give? One of the things that the Bloc Québécois is asking for, and the Parti Québécois are asking for, are that the federal government cede all immigration powers to Quebec.
Right, which is never going to happen.
Well,
right?
It's never going to happen, but partly it's already happened. In the 1990s, the Mulroney government signed an agreement, the Bouchard-Gagnon-Tremblay agreement, by the Quebec government already controls the vast majority of immigration in the province of Quebec. The one area where the federal government, no matter who is in office, can never give that power over to any province is on asylum seekers and refugees, because that also involves international treaties.
So, okay, I don't want to belabor the point and say, so what is going to happen? But again, if that's never going to happen, because as Mark Miller has often said, and I think Justin Trudeau has said the same, Quebec already has more power over immigration than any other province in the country, right? We've established that.
Which is a factual statement.
Right. So if you're not going to get a win on immigration, what's the next thing you're looking at as the bloc here to try to force the Liberals when I say to earn your support from the bloc that you want to have done? I mean, how will this play out?
Well, how will this play out? Again, minority parliament's unpredictable. The next step after that is presumably the fiscal economic update, which is scheduled to come in November.
Okay.
Will the bloc get this extraction and then table its own confidence motion? Unlikely. Will the Conservatives table during their next opposition day another non-confidence motion, this time, say, talking about immigration? So I've lived through minority governments from 2006 to 2011. All I can tell you is you wake up in the morning and you're thinking A is going to happen, and by the time you're trying to have lunch, it's a completely different story.
I got it. Okay. Let's talk about Pablo Rodriguez, his decision, which we all knew was coming anyway, officially now made today. What does this do? Because obviously, we now know his files were taken over. Anita Anand is the new transport minister. Jean-Yves Duclos is the new Quebec lieutenant. What does this do to the party overall? Because the interesting part of this decision, right, was not just that he has decided he's going to run, that he's decided to sit as an independent. What does that do?
Well, that's a very smart choice. So Mr. Rodriguez has certain challenges, certain opportunities, and one Achilles heel. I'll start with the Achilles heel. The Achilles heel is that over the last 20 years, as a federal liberal, the party that he has been with has taken positions that don't necessarily align themselves with provincial policy, with provincial priorities. Don't forget, just because someone is called a liberal, a provincial liberal and a federal liberal, the only thing they have in common is the word liberal. So what Mr. Rodriguez tried to do today, and that's his narrative, is that, listen up, I was a member of a team, a member of a caucus. Some of the things that I did or that I supported, it's because the leader chose to. Now that I'm running as leader, I will run on my own vision. He was asked an interesting question, and it was a trick question, and he actually answered it well. He said, how would you have voted if you were in the National Assembly on the motion that recently passed on Miss El Gawabi, who is the anti-Islamophobia czar appointed by Prime Minister Trudeau, who recently wrote a letter to universities saying, I'd like you to hire more Muslim professors in universities. And from a Quebec perspective, he answered it by saying, I would have voted for her to resign. So the challenge for Mr. Rodriguez, and I would say the challenge for the serious candidates. So right now, what I see as serious candidates is Mr. Denis Coderre and Mr. Pablo Rodriguez. Those are the two candidates who are probably the front runners. Their challenge, and more so for Mr. Rodriguez, because Mr. Coderre has been out of federal politics for quite some time now, is how is he perceived as both being Captain Canada as it relates to sovereignists, and how is he Captain Quebec as it relates to federal politics in Ottawa?
So, okay, let me add, that's a great question to ask, or a question to pose in terms of, okay, how's he going to portray himself? How do you think he does that? How does he bridge that gap?
Well, he books himself 2 lunch meetings. The first one with Jean Charest and the second one with Lucien Bouchard. These are 2 leaders who were both Premier of Quebec, who came from Ottawa. Premier Charest was leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, and Lucien Bouchard was a minister in the Mulroney government. Now, they were conservative, so the transition is actually a lot smoother because the vision of the country is aligned much more from a federal conservative politician to becoming a provincial Quebec politician. But the learning curve, and this is something that Premier Charest has told me himself, the learning curve is so steep. In the very beginning, if you remember in the late 1990s when Jean Charest came to Quebec City, the first 6, 8, 12 months were very difficult months for him. He was fumbling things. Mm-hmm. It's a steep learning curve. Advice, the most important advice is don't bring all your Ottawa advisors with you for this leadership race and ultimately if and when you become leader. You need to surround yourself with people that live and breathe Quebec politics.
Okay. Interesting take. Dimitri, I thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Aaron.
Dimitri SOUDAS, former Director of Communications. Interesting take there, huh? At the end, sit down, have a lunch. Jean Charest, Lucien Bouchard. That'd be something, wouldn't it?